everybody. This is Ramona Yandris to our Let's Talk About It program today. It's awesome being able to be with you, and I think we have a good program for you. And I'm hoping, against hope, that what we say today will be a great blessing. I have with me right now Chris Mendoza McCorkle. So some of you knew her as a Mendoza. I've known her as both. She's been a great friend of mine for quite a few years. In fact, since 1988. And she grew up with my boys. So I want you to give her a big welcome. And we're glad to have you, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm blessed, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And I always enjoy our time together. No matter what we're doing, we always have a blast. Work, play, no matter what.
She is the life of the party. I will tell you that much.
You're the life of the party, and I'm just along for the ride, holding on for dear life.
No, she has been the life of the party since she's been here. So we've had a lot of history together.
Yes.
I known you since 1988, so that's how many years ago?
Well,
It's tell my age.
Yeah. It's been well over 30 years.
Okay, leave it at that. I made friends with her mom right away. Her mom and I clicked.
Yeah.
I was a music director at a church, and her mom was one of the first ones to really welcome me. And we had so much fun interacting with your mom and your dad. And her parents pastored a Spanish work in the Fresno area, and they did such a great work, and I was always so proud of them. And I want to talk about a few things that's happened in her life, and I think she has a great message for you. And if you have anyone in your family or that you know who's either gone through grief or has struggled with living for the Lord, I want you to share this, because this message here today, I believe, will help bring people back on track. And that's our goal, is to help somebody that's struggling in this day and time. And I know the Lord is so gracious and merciful. So I want to begin to talk first about the church that your mom and dad pastored. How was it being a PK in your time, and how did it affect you and your family?
Going back to that time, it was a very unique dynamic that I found myself in, because my dad did pastor a church, but it was also one of the first daughter work out of the church that we were in.
The first one?
It was.
Wow.
Technically the first daughter work, yes. And so, and it started in the prayer room, and our second service that we had, Dad was picking people up, as always, soul winner to the very end. And he was given a ride to a couple of ladies. He had them sitting in the back, as is the gentlemanly and chivalrous thing to do when you're giving a ride to ladies who are not your wife. And he got in a terrible accident, and it was a tragedy, and it was a rough start to that church. But it just further confirmed in his mind at that time that the devil's fighting this hard, and we're going to be successful. And it didn't. He ended up building a great church there in that area that was completely todo en español.
Sí,
Solamente. And, but unfortunately, I didn't learn Spanish well, so I don't feel comfortable speaking it. But that also led to why I didn't attend there as often as I should have. And if we go back to regrets, that would be one of mine, and I never felt like a PK in that way, because where I actually attended church and did most of my socializing and fellowshipping, and all my friends, Ryan and Clint and everybody that we grew up with, they were, I wasn't a PK there. I was just Chris, or I was just Christina.
So you didn't have all that scrutiny.
I didn't have as
on
much
you,
pressure.
like
I
most
did
of
when I
them
went
do.
to their church, and there were young people there, and I'm friends with them to this day. Thank God I can say that I feel blessed to be
Yeah.
able to have maintained those friendships, because it can be a difficult thing
Yeah.
to be the PK
Right.
at your church,
Right.
and I never liked being the PK. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't want to be called a PK, and it always kind of made
Did
me a
you feel
little
like
ill
it
at
was like
ease.
pressured on you?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I'm like, that's my dad's
yeah.
calling, and well, and actually, I took for granted as well that everybody was like my dad. I figured every pastor must be like my dad, and come to find out that wasn't at all true. But
It's not
he
true.
was a great soul winner,
Yeah.
and he was an exemplary Christian, and very
Yes, he was.
yeah, he the good die young. So he was gone too soon,
I think
and
a thing to say about your dad was he was full of mercy to his people, and
he
he
was,
was very
boy.
quiet when he wasn't in the pulpit. He was not a man that went around and spread any kind of turmoil or gossip.
Mm-mm.
He kept things to himself. But so he stood like a tall giant to me, even though
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't a really tall
He
man.
wasn't. He was short.
He stood as a giant to me because he was careful about the things of God and the work of God. Wouldn't you say that?
Oh yeah, yeah. We never heard anything negative in our home about anybody, much less the ministry.
Wow. That's
It
a
was
testimony.
very important, and
Right.
again, this was something I took for granted until I visited friends' homes where that was not the case,
Yeah.
and the parents would be openly speaking about, the pastor,
Yeah.
and or people that I thought were their friends, and it was alarming, as a young person. I remember my first encounter was with gossip wasn't until a teenager.
Wow.
I really had never experienced it, and it was just shocking, honestly, because my parents really never did it, and I've tried to. There's many things that I've tried to just be like
Right.
them in, and that's one of them that I've
Right.
very much emphasized in our home too. So anyway,
So
skipping ahead.
no, you're doing great. So in doing all of that, did you? Because you sing now. In doing all of that, did you ever sing and help lead worship
I did.
at your dad's
Yeah.
church?
Oh yeah. I could sing in Spanish, and
No,
I
wait, you
actually
can sing in Spanish, but you can't speak
I
Spanish.
can read Spanish.
Okay.
It's from music. Music's done so much for me in my life, but that's one of the things that it's done for me, is that I can actually read it. So most of the time when I see a Spanish sign or bulletin board, I can read the whole thing, and not just read it, but understand most of what I'm reading. But again, being able to speak it, oh my goodness, I'm just not there. But yeah, I played many services. They had a different service schedule than the church where I attended, so I did attend every other service that wasn't a corresponding night to the night that I was
So
going to
you
be.
really should have been saved and sanctified all the
Oh
church you
my
went to.
goodness, I had so much
All the church
church.
you went into.
I went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 services a week for years. 5, yeah,
That sounds like my growing up.
yeah, yeah.
So you were talking about singing, being able to sing in Spanish. Let me tell you something. She was with us yesterday during our praise and worship. And in the middle of the praise and worship, we had, because it was International Sunday, we had songs that had little excerpts of Spanish, Espanol. Well, my dad also was Spanish, and his people all come from Barcelona, and so yeah, I should know it. But like her, I grew up in Indiana, and no bueno. We did not get no. We would know a few words here and there, and we would hear my dad sing in Spanish, and every Mother's Day he would sing in Spanish. But when it comes to learning things in song, let me tell you something I've learned, and see what you think about this, is when you can sing and play an instrument, it is the one thing that turns on every neuron in your brain. This is true. Look it up. Every neuron on your brain lights up like, the stars in the sky. And your brain then is able to receive information and that you would have never thought possible. And so it's like when a person has Alzheimer's and you sing to them for about a minute afterwards, you've got that parent back or that Alzheimer's patient back again, and they can talk to you like it's just normal. Well, that happens to me when I can sing Spanish. I don't know. It's like you can remember those words because it's done in that form. And so it's done in a pose. You know what a pose is when you're writing poems. It's done in the pose form, but then the music added to it lights up those neurons. And that's why this is just a nugget I'm giving everybody here. That's why when we sing and praise to the Lord, it's like you enter the throne room immediately. It's the one thing that you can do with your whole heart. The Bible calls it the whole heart, but really it's with the brain. The heart does nothing. We just call it the heart because that's the most vital part of our body. But the brain, it just lights up every neuron. So in doing that, it just made me remember that.
Yeah.
So then I want to talk a few minutes about what happened to your dad passing. I know this was such a great trial and such a big occasion that changed the whole trajectory of your path in your life and your mother's path and her life. And I just remember when I heard the news, how devastating it was because he was truly a jewel, truly a jewel.
54 years old. Yeah, I'm 48 now, and it's getting closer every year. I'm like, wow.
Share with the audience, if you don't mind, what happened and how it affected you and your family.
He had taken, he started this church and just it took off, and it was getting to the point where he really needed to stop working his full-time job and dedicate his energy to pastoring. And it was more forced upon him because he was an excellent car painter. He could tell you, we'd be driving down the street and he could tell you all the colors that were blended to make that particular paint color. He was so excellent and skilled. And we'd be driving through Fresno and there would be a beautiful fire truck with all this gold leaf detailing. And he'd say, I did that.
Wow.
And he'd done it all freehand. He was just top
Steady
of the
hand.
line when it came to that auto body work. And so it got to the point where he couldn't move some of his jacks and stuff around. And he, didn't understand it, went to the doctor. And they misdiagnosed him several times before they figured out he had a rare form of muscular dystrophy that was eventually going to cause his heart to give out as a muscle.
Yeah.
And then that is basically what happened in the end. And it was such a slow process. It was 17 years from the time that he first became weak and, we all knew something was wrong. And to his passing in 2004, that it was just, it was world and life changing for me. It was shocking, even though we knew and prepared a lot. It was still a shock to the system. And then to just suddenly now, as I was finally accepting who I was with and our relationship and him as a pastor and admiring his drive so much as a new mom and a parent myself, and realizing, man, my parents were right about everything. I was at that stage in life, and then I lost them. And so it was it was tough. I would have liked to have a few more years, but God knew, and yeah,
So how did it affect your family when that happened?
we had a blended family before that was even a PC term to call it a blended family. And I was my mom's daughter, and I had step siblings from my dad. But he, from the year 2 years old, he was all I knew. And as I got older, I knew that he was not my biological father, and came to actually meet him and get to know him, and we keep in touch now. But the man that raised me is Brother Mendoza,
Yeah,
and I don't call him that, but you know what I
I know
mean.
your dad.
And so he's the one that raised me. He's the one that put all the things in me that
Right.
I have now, and I'm grateful for that. But yeah, at a stage in my life where I was beginning to fully realize just what it meant to be his daughter, and what an impact he'd had on so many hundreds of people.
Yes.
And the fact that not only that, but his ministry continues through others to this day, because
It's a legacy.
people that he pastored are pastoring churches.
Wow.
And I'm like,
Wow.
it's not, I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
That was all him, but I'm so proud that was my dad.
Yeah.
It
left a
makes me feel
legacy for
so
sure.
good. Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, do any of them pastor in the area, or
In the Central Valley area. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So his work is being carried on.
It is.
That's a blessing.
The truth is marching on, like the song says. Yeah.
See, you're looking into the life of a preacher's kid, and people think it's all rosy, and they think being a preacher's kid is glamorous. It's far from it.
True.
You're going to see things today that you're going to think, wow, this is not what I thought being involved in a pastor's home is like, because there's so many demands on you, and you're expected to walk and talk and live a certain way, and you're critiqued all the time. And if you make any misstep, you are immediately told on, and you're not given the same mercy and grace that people allow other children to give. You're expected to be perfect, and it's one of the hardest things to live up to, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm.
I know I had struggled with that even in my time growing up, and people really expected me to be perfect, and I was far from perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That there's so many expectations, just like you're an adult. Children are not adults. And I would encourage any of you in the audience, as you're hearing this, that you take the expectation off of pastors' kids. Allow them to make a mistake and allow them to recover. Mm-hmm. Because it's in that mistake time that makes or breaks you as a young person learning to live for God. We don't have the wisdom at that time of our life to see that maybe God's working things out to mold us and make us better. All we see is that someone's tattling on us and that we didn't do it right. And after you don't do it right for so many times and you're hearing all this feedback, you're thinking, what's the use? Because if everything I do is taken wrong and I'm told on every time, I'm never allowed to recover. Right. Because they're going to bring this up every time the kids get together. Well, I can't let Ramona go because she's going to do this, this, and this, or say this, this, and this. And it begins to put a stigma on you, and you can't move past it. So allow your preacher's kids to make a mistake. Allow the evangelist kids to make a mistake. You want your children to live for God, but you also want them to learn how to recover. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that's one of the hardest things we had to learn in being preachers' kids, is how to recover? Yeah. Because we can all go to the altar, mm-hmm. but then how do we recover with the people if you don't allow us to? Mm-hmm. Now, your well, I should say this. All the children that were there in that department at that time, in the youth department, they were all very special to me. I was the music director, but I had boys, and I had one that was in the youth group, and one that was just a little ornery and not quite yet in the youth group. One y'all picked on all the time.
It was so much fun.
So they began to do all these activities together, and so many nights I found all these kids piled up in my home.
Yeah. Well, we lived right around the corner, so that was going to be, I mean, we were, especially as I said, when we're going to the church y'all were going to for all our fellowship and
Right.
our actual
Right.
English speaking church where
Right.
we could understand everything that was happening, then, that we just felt at home and we had so much fun. There were so many crazy stories.
Stories.
Summers where your nephew came and visited, and oh man, we had so much fun. It was such a blast. So much fun. Yeah.
A lot of escapades, and I had to have a few chats here and there. But,
Oh yeah.
But that youth group that we had, all went to camp meetings and youth conferences. Did you go to just about every one of them?
Oh yeah. Well, because I was a just insufferable overachiever at that time. Not so much anymore, but I grew out of it. But I was on the Bible quiz team.
Okay.
On top of everything else.
How many scriptures did you learn?
Well, it was typically the material covered would be about 500 per season.
Okay. Can you quote it now?
I can quote some of them, but it just depends on there are passages in Acts that I don't forget. I mean, when I'm put on the spot, of course, I'm going to forget everything. My mind goes completely blank, and it's like it never happened. But in the moment when I'm talking about, it's come to me in Bible studies and stuff. I'm like, oh man, I'll remember that scripture, about baptism or whatever. We're supposed to learn that many scriptures. I was not a model quizzer, my coach would tell you, and I did my best with all the socializing and everything else to get most of the material down. And we did go to nationals one year when it was actually an accomplishment to go to nationals, and we were a new team at that time. There was no now they have a whole bracket for all the new teams that they just compete against each other all year. Well, we had one tournament at the beginning of the year that was for new teams, and then you go and play with the big boys. And that's what we did, and we still managed to make it to nationals that year.
Oh my goodness.
And it was an extremely competitive time in the Western District. Excellent, excellent time to be Bible quizzer. I made friends that I have for life that we still stay in touch. And such an amazing experience. And oftentimes camp meeting was part of that quizzing year where they would have our district finals at camp meeting. And then afterwards they would hand out trophies at one of the services. I don't know if you remember.
I did.
So I'd be one of the, going up there. And anyway, it was so fun. Yeah. So I did camp meetings. Youth camp was also big, going to Donkey Rock. Donkey Rock.
Well, it's not really called Donkey Rock.
Not in California, but.
So it is called something else that is not appropriate to say. So the pastor there changed yes, it is in the Bible. The pastor there changed the name of it so it could be correct for the children to say.
Donkey Rock or Burst.
Yes. Yeah, you put that on the bus, didn't you?
They put it on the trailer.
Oh, they did?
They put it on the luggage trailer. Because Donkey Rock or Bus was, I don't know. I still don't know why that was wrong. But anyway, Donkey Rock or Bus.
Well, I've had the privilege of knowing so many of these young people. And since they've grown and are married and have come to our home, and I still have contact with quite a few of them. And I have also had the privilege, and this is what is near and dear to my heart. I've had the privilege of restoring a couple of them back to the Lord who had backslid. And the kids are close to us, and close to me. And I took like a special interest in working with them because my mom and dad did that. They always had somebody living in our home and were working with someone, and I found myself doing the same thing where I had many young men live in our home throughout the years. Bible school days when my son was in Bible school, he'd bring home kids that didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving or the weekend or wherever. My home became a hub for all the Bible school kids, and we would preach them. We would give them a start, and we would counsel them and sit and talk with them. And these kids are all special to me, and I've seen them grow into amazing ministers and evangelists. And we get calls often from so many of them thanking us, for caring about them. But I have to say that we did come across some religious spirits when we were restoring these boys back to the Lord. And I saw these boys restored back. Some of them took many years. I have to tell you, it was so ingrained in them to just be punished but not restored. And it was punitive type of dealing with someone who had sinned and had fallen short. Well, hello, we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God, the Bible says. And if you cannot restore children and young people back to God, and even older people, then you have missed the mark, because there is such a powerful ministry in that than when you can bring somebody back to God. Now, these boys have been restored, but here's the sad thing. The religious people are still religious, and they're still not restoring. And I think we need a revival among our people to restore and for a restoration ministry.
Yeah.
Because in this day and time of all times, we need to bring people back to the fold and back to God.
Yeah.
And I find those who do not show grace, nor do they go after those that fall into sin, most time, not every time, but most time, it's because they have sin in their life that's been unrepentant and hasn't been dealt with, and it's not found out. Because when you have that problem, I remember my dad telling me one time, when somebody gets up and always is preaching on the skirt line or the dress line of a lady or how they dress, and it's a constant thing. He told me one time, he said, it's usually because they have a problem. So, not saying that's always,
Yeah.
but there has to be a ministry of restoration. Yes, people are going to do things they shouldn't do, but how are we dealing with it? And I've asked God throughout our whole ministry to give me a ministry of restoration. And everything we do and say should be geared to restoring that which is lost. If he took the time to go out to look for that one sheep that was lost, how much more should we do, because he has been merciful and full of grace to us. Don't be afraid of the word grace. Don't be afraid of the connotation of the word grace. Grace is all throughout the Bible. And if you can't show grace, then honestly, we have no business in ministry.
Yeah, that's true.
We do believe in the perfecting of the saints, but how far are you going to perfect someone that's not living for him? You've got to be able to go back and win them back to him. So you have been involved in music ministry. Her and her husband are really good, and she sang for us last night at our church over in Tracy, and just brought the power down. And where do you think that gift came from, Christina?
Actually, I can remember the first time I sang in church. I was 4,
Oh, wow.
and Elder Morton held the mic for me. And I don't remember how it came to be that I was invited to come sing, but I knew I was going to be called up to sing. And sure enough, that service, Elder Morton called me up, And I got up there and sang, "It's bubbling, it's bubbling,
It's bubbling in
it's
my soul."
bubbling in my heart."
We're
I
singing,
sing it.
shouting,
Yeah.
since Jesus made me
Um,
whole.
and then, and you know how Elder is. So
Yeah.
then he made the whole church sing with me. And I can remember him holding the mic.
Yeah.
And you know, no
It's
cordless mics
cute.
back then. It was 1980.
Wired.
So but yeah, I was little, and because I have a crazy mind, I can even remember the dress I was wearing. But
Oh,
yeah, it had little red mushrooms on it, and I got up there with my little pigtails and sang my heart out. But
love
I
it.
I have always loved to sing, and my aunt has hilarious stories actually that we won't tell here about my singing, but it's just something that I've always loved to do. And when we came to church, I was only 4. We were brand new, just saved, and here with our blended family. And my mom was completely new to the truth. She had been Catholic. She nearly
Wow.
became a nun. She
Wow.
loved Catholicism so much. She was so deeply entrenched, and
So you
and
almost didn't make it in this world.
I mean to tell you. So, but she no, so
She's
was
she's not a
so
nun baby.
it was so new. No, it was so new to her. But anyway, so yeah, getting coming to church, and hearing everybody sing, and I just loved it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And anytime anybody would ask me to sing, I was just happy to do it, and never even thought about what I sounded like or anything like that. I would just open my mouth and just start singing, And then as I grew older, and like, oh, voice control, and now you gotta go do the
Yeah.
exercises and
Yeah.
all this stuff, and all kinds of, there's a lot of things that you can do now. And actually, if you want to, I tell my daughter, she is an excellent pianist, and she's a budding vocalist.
Wow.
And you just practice.
Yeah.
You can learn it as a skill. You can
Right.
train your muscles to do what you want them to
Right.
do. And she's got an ear and natural inclination for it. But anyway, I do love it, and having an outlet through my dad's church, actually, because at the church where we grew up, I never played there. I was never on the schedule or anything. Even for chapel at school or whatever, I played a couple of times, and we had chapel every day back then. Now the Christian schools do it once a week, if that. But back then, it was chapel every single day.
Wow.
And it was a full albeit little, praise team with a 3-piece band and a little tiny
Did
mini.
you sing there?
Oh, yeah. I sang a lot, but never played. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was,
Don't you find that gave you the ability to break the nervousness because
yeah.
you were pushed in front of people?
constantly. And that's something that I've told me and my husband have talked about many times, is the fact that as I became an adult and an actual worship leader, and doing choir clinics and things like that, I sang at my dad's funeral.
Yeah.
I never.
How was that?
Actually, I did fine. It was one of the few times that I've been able to sing that song and not cry. But I just.
Do you remember the song?
Yes, I sang "How Great Thou Art."
Wow.
And I did it in Spanish and English.
Wow.
And
To be able to sing that when you're going through that,
it was tough. It was tough, but it helped that. And one of the reasons that I sang it is because I knew that he would have wanted us to have an atmosphere of worship,
Just have
there,
church.
and just have church.
Yeah.
And so there were several songs on the schedule that were along those lines, and the one that I did was one of them. And I could have sang something sad, but it's not what he would have wanted. And yeah, I feel like I did right by him on that. But it was tough, yeah. But I never had nerves until coming back from being out of church for so long.
Let's talk about that right now.
Okay.
Because we
Okay,
have,
sure.
Now, let's first talk about meeting your husband. So you married a great man.
I did.
And I love Ralph. He's one of those men that's just solid. If you want to talk about somebody that's
Reliable.
just solid and reliable and there, every pastor would give an eye tooth to have a couple like you both that are just solid. They're there, they're willing, they're on point. And if you are in music ministry in any way, shape, or form, or any ministry, if you will learn that being there and being solid and dependable, and every weekend not just running off somewhere, and you're at your place of duty, because when you take a position in a church, a pastor relies on you just taking it and running with it.
Yeah.
And that's the way I always saw you guys. You were always there, always present, always so helpful. So tell us how you met him.
Yeah, well, I met him at church.
What church?
At the church that he grew up at in Southern California.
Okay.
And he actually, his family had been in that church his whole life and even predated that. And the pastor and bishop that are there now were voted in because the McCorkles were 7 of the 11 affirming votes to give the church to them. So so the McCorkles go way back in that church.
Unreal.
And so I met this Ralph McCorkle, and first of all, me being kind of a little bit rough around the edges, I was, my immediate response was, "What kind of name is Ralph McCorkle? What's a Ralph McCorkle?" And then I saw him, and I'm like, "I don't know, but he's kind of hot."
Were you set up?
No, because he was dating someone else.
Okay.
And I was just freshly new in town. He was a couple of years, he's 3 years younger than me. And so he's dating someone, and but I met him and it was like, he's really good looking. And he's just, when you meet him and you see he's got this very unusual coloring that's very, it's, I don't know. Anyway,
he's a very handsome man.
He's a handsome man.
That's no joke.
So
I know that was your first attraction.
It was. And
he was doing well in church.
He was the drummer, and when I came to that church,
love a drummer?
I know.
As a
I
kid?
know. He's wonderful too. He's so good. He's still good to this day, even though he thinks that he can't keep up with the kids, but he can if he wanted to.
So now all of your living for the Lord and being involved in music and being involved in church, and then you all married, and then you became the music minister at that very church, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you were there. How long were you the music minister there?
Ooh.
How many years?
I want to say at least 5. I can't remember exactly now. It's been so long ago. And there was a time, and the people involved, if they watch this, will recall, where it was a team leading the department, and I was a part of that team. So if you include that time, I mean, it was almost 10 years of participating in ministry there. That's including the 2 years that we spent in Fresno when we first got married. We lived here for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And then decided to move back because we just liked Southern California better. But
will you talk in depth to us about the time that you began to pull away from the church and what happened? Because there's so many people that I know that will hear this message. And some of you have struggled, and you think that God is not in what you're doing, and you begin to pull back. And as you begin to pull back, you walk away from God, and things happen that you might not have ever intended for it to happen. Mm-hmm. And I want you to hear this story because I want you to let them know how it happened to you, and then we're going to talk about what led you back to God. Mm-hmm. So if you can talk to our audience and just give them the little story, and I imagine they're going to see themselves in a lot of your story.
Yeah, I think so. I was telling you earlier, and I'll say now that I, as music director and the go-to keyboardist for my church for years, I backslid right there on the platform in front of everyone, and nobody noticed. And I knew, and my closest friends knew, but it was a very tiny circle that knew. I held it very close to the vest and didn't want to, I loved doing the music still. There would I would I had this internal struggle going on where I loved the music so much, and I do still to this day, but I loved it so much and I didn't want that part to end.
Yeah.
I just was having so much trouble with being the only one that was relied on and so heavily, and it often felt very thankless, and I just
Yeah.
became bitter and like, why do I do
Yeah.
this? My family never sees me.
Right.
I don't know how many times my son fell asleep in our office because we were busy there just into the, wee hours of the morning, making tracks. And I mean, this is before things have gotten so much easier.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get on Prime and I mean,
Yeah.
you can have church with your finger,
right.
just beat, 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 and it
Right.
sounds great.
Now, especially with AI,
I mean,
I can make up a song here in just seconds if
you
I wanted
don't,
to.
you don't have to have talent anymore.
Even the words I can make up. I just give them the thought of what I want, and AI will make me a whole song.
It's crazy.
It's
It's
put the tune
wild.
to it.
It's a little scary. Yeah. And like make it sound like a Taylor Swift song and
Right.
it does it. It's
I
wild.
know.
But yeah, so we, very dedicated there and it just fell into sin and didn't want to go back. I just
Now,
felt
how long were you out?
it was well over 10 years, about
Wow.
12 years total. Yeah.
It was during, I think, toward the end of that. I was going to be at SoCal camp meeting, and I called you,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew you were out of church,
Mm-hmm.
but I never mentioned that you were out of church.
Mm-mm.
I just wanted you to come help me with my booth,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
we never talked about it. I didn't preach to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing you respond to all of the people that you knew as they would come into my booth and were buying left and right. And we had piles of clothes and piles of this and that.
Yeah.
And the laughter and the old times that we reminisced about. Did that matter to you? Did that
Oh, yeah.
change you in any way?
It definitely, because there were a couple of times you were one person. Debbie Size also invited me to a conference, and so there were a couple of times in all those years where I would come, and I feel so loved and go, well, this isn't the reception I expected. You
You
know,
expected to be shunned?
oh, I definitely did, just because of how I'd been treated after we left
Prior.
our church, and so and so many things that were said
Yeah.
that could have just been fine not ever being said, and
But then it
everybody
might have
would have been
taken
just
you
fine.
out and you would have never come back, right? This is why it's so important when people leave the Lord that you keep them in your loop of friends and then you talk to them. And don't talk to them like they're backslid. Talk to them like they're still in the church. Because when my sister
Just be normal.
backslid, and I know she tells this, so I'm not telling anything that she doesn't know. This was way back in the day. And when I would call her, I would never talk to her about being backslid. I just began to talk to about the services like she was right there. And she told me later in life that it was those phone calls that made her want to come back. You know?
Yeah,
It-
it's when, now going back to the religiosity and some of the people that kind of tend to get it wrong, is you definitely don't want to be hearing that man, I just wish you wouldn't have cut your hair, or,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that. It's like, man, that's in the trash heap already.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
we, I know, me too. I can't, can I just get a little bit of grace here?
That was only an expression of when you were out. That was not the reason you left.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
that's what
yeah.
has to be dealt with is the matter of the heart, not the outward part.
Yeah.
So was that kind of a struggle for you to fear that condemnation of every little thing that you demonstrated instead of winning your heart back to God?
And then one of the big things, which is something that I had grown to hate because of everything that happened. One of the main things that I would hear from people who knew me is, man, what a wasted talent. And I'm like, man, that feels horrible.
That was harsh.
Yeah.
That was harsh.
And I did hear it a little bit too much, but it also toughened me up, and I'm glad I heard it, because there for every person that said that, there was 10 that were just not like that at all.
I think some people honestly do not know what to say.
Yeah.
And we're so
They mean well.
They mean well, but they're
They-
so used to only talking to sinners, they don't know how to talk to those that just need restoration. It's the Bible has a scripture that says, "Of some making a difference." That means you can't treat everybody the same.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's one of the main complaints. If you go into any given group discussion, any thread, I'll see a pastor post something about backsliding, and they can't even fathom ever wanting to backslide, and and all us backsliders will jump on there and go, well, sorry to disappoint you, but it does happen. And Jesus, in all his parables, the bulk of his parables were about reaching the lost
Right.
and reaching those prodigals,
Yes.
not about
Yes.
all the other things that we tend to focus on. And that was where his passion was turning people around and setting them on a straight path. And it's really not rocket science, but when you don't really have a real experience with God, you're not going to exemplify the fruits of the Spirit,
Yeah.
or the fruit
Yeah.
of the Spirit, that would compel them through you and through your actions by saying nothing. You don't need to say all those things, because your actions and your love brings them in. It draws them in.
Let's talk about what was it that brought you back? What was the event?
It was COVID. COVID turned our lives upside down, as it did many people. But at the time,
Because I had not seen you post on Facebook hardly at all. I periodically would see you play something and sing something, but I would see like the piano or sometimes you sing, but I didn't really hear much from you. And then all of a sudden, COVID came, and you were blowing Facebook up,
yeah, I was.
blowing it up.
I was so, I would pace the floor for hours in my kitchen. I could not believe my eyes and ears and everything that was happening. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I was so, and I could not believe, furthermore, most people's reactions. I'm like, why aren't you more worried about this?
Yeah.
This is awful. So just to give a tiny bit of history, while we were backslid, we never missed church on Easter or Christmas. We became holiday saints, okay? We went every holiday. Our son went without us. We were happy to let him go.
Did he constantly go without you?
Almost. There were a couple of times where he wavered, but for the most part, he was pretty solid.
That's really
especially
good.
once he started driving. He drove himself, and he wanted to go to church, and he's a big part of why we got back in.
Wow.
He helped keep us attached to it.
Yeah. Did he bring stories home?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and see, he was never preachy to us. He would always just say, "Do you want to go with me this morning? You
Yeah.
want to go with me this morning?" Even though we always said no, he
Yeah.
would still ask us every
Wow.
single service. And,
Wow.
but we never, he didn't know all of our hurts and all of our disgruntlement because we didn't talk about that with
Yeah.
him. So he was completely naive and would go and we would say, "Yes, that's a great church. We love them," and not talk about anything negative, you know. And so anyway, so COVID happened and we wanted to go to church on Easter as we had always done every year once we backslid. And nothing was open. Every single church was shut down, and even churches that I couldn't have in my wildest imaginations thought would shut down. And they were all going to do it online, or some even did it over the phone because they didn't believe in video. And we were beside ourselves that this had happened, that every church had closed down right in the middle of when the church was needed the most.
See, Christina, God always has a hook. You know how when you're selling something, there's always a hook that will get people, but God always has a hook. And he used COVID. He used COVID just to get to you. And I think that was your hook.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden she's starting to talk religious and
I was on fire, man.
She got on fire. So where did you go back to church?
Well, that's the thing. We could not find a church open.
Yeah.
And we heard about Pastor Tony Spell in Baton Rouge had not stopped having services, and everyone was freaking out, and people are calling him and telling him, "What are you doing?" And, don't you know what the Bible says? And, yada, yada. And we're like, he's right. He's one of the few that is right. And we're going to go to church there.
Okay.
So we found tickets. The tickets we flew round trip for less than $100 from
goodness.
California to Baton Rouge because it was so stinking cheap at the time. And because nobody was flying, and we had the plane to ourselves. It was great. It was like a private flight. But, and nobody was wearing masks at that time because Fauci hadn't told us that we had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it hadn't gotten quite that mad yet, but I could see what was coming.
Yeah.
And I was like, we never should have shut down. That's my only beef. I know we're not talking politics. That's my only beef with Trump. He never should have listened to Fauci. Never should have shut down. Granted, he did it in the past.
Yeah.
He's still the best choice.
Yeah.
Enough said. Okay.
I know.
But so he did. It shut down. There was nothing open. No churches open. And we're like, the church is so needed right now, and this is where we need to be. And so, we just started jumping back in and slowly getting more involved. And my husband had grown a rather large beard, and he eventually shaved it off, and that was a big turning point. And that we were like,
there's always
okay.
a sign that shows that you're ready just to submit back to the will of God. And one thing I've always noticed is that God uses people even after failure. Men can fail and things happen, but in that failure, God can use that failure for you to minister to others who have failed, because everybody's going to have a failure here or there in their life. It's what you do in your restoration. And I want you to talk about where you are now, because you're no longer in Baton Rouge. So where are you living now, and whose church are you going to?
So we're actually in Little Rock now.
Okay.
And
That's at Brother Holmes?
At Brother Holmes. And to make a very long, arduous story very short, our son attended a conference there.
Okay.
Back in 2018, I believe. And when he came home from that conference, he said, "Mom, I love that church. I'm moving there." And in 2020, when COVID was going nuts and everything, it just worked out. He found a roommate and he moved there, and he just loved it so much. He had a good church here, and he's still great friends with the pastor and everybody there, left on great terms. It wasn't a bad thing. He just wanted to be in Little Rock, and he eventually drew us there. So we
Are you happy?
Oh yes, I love it there.
So I want to know if you can leave us with a word, or leave our audience with a word here. And for those that are not fully living for the Lord, I think they flirt with the world. You can see them sometimes in the church. You don't know where they are. They don't talk about it because people don't open up what's going on in here. Share with us, if you can, what they can do to fully give their life back to the Lord. And then I want us to pray for them. So if you don't mind doing that, just leave us with a word that you want to give to those that have walked away from him.
Yeah. And yes. It doesn't matter. And you always hear people say when they get up and testify after they've come back, it always takes you further than you think you're going to go. Sin takes you further than, you didn't intend to. And it's so true.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd be addicted to drugs. I never, ever would have dreamed I'd be addicted to drugs. I had never had a drink in my life until I was almost 35 years old.
Wow.
And I became a terrible alcoholic, addicted to drugs, and God delivered me from all that before I even came back. Thank God.
Yes.
I was able to overcome that. But it wasn't easy. Withdrawal from drugs was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever been through physically. It was a terrible experience. And you just go in those dark times.
Yeah.
You're like, man, how on earth did I even end up here?
Yeah.
This is, I was fine. I would have never known had I just not started.
Yes. Yes.
And so,
Because you weren't born for that. You
No.
weren't dedicated to the Lord for that.
no. And so I'm so glad that he kept me through all that,
Yes.
because there were times that I probably really should have died and
Yeah.
took way too much drugs.
Yeah.
And God
Because
kept me.
when a person is without God, they're miserable.
Oh yeah, there's
You want
you're
everybody to
filling a
think you're
void.
happy. Oh, yeah.
You're trying. It can't be filled without God.
Right.
But you try.
Right.
Yeah. And I tried.
Let's join hands, and I want you to pray.
Okay.
I want you to pray, and let's just ask God to bless those that have wandered away and to restore them.
Okay.
And as we are praying for them, I want you to pray for yourself, that God will make you an instrument that he can use to bring people back to the Lord. Because in this day and time, we want everybody to get right with God, because the coming of the Lord is so soon.
Yes.
And we've got to make sure that we prepare to be ready, to be rapture ready.
Yeah.
And I don't want those that have known the Lord, let alone those that don't even know the Lord now, but especially those that have known the Lord, I want them to come back. So lead us in prayer if you can.
Okay. Lord, we come before your presence today, and we know that you are a maker of all things that are
Lord.
good, and you have done nothing but give us good things in our lives,
Yes,
and you
Jesus.
want what's best for us. And we want to just live our lives for you. And sometimes it's hard to find
thank
our
you,
way
Lord.
back, but we want to just ask for your mercy and grace, and that you would light the path.
Yes.
And when you go searching, it will be so easy, and it will be so revealed to you.
Yes.
We pray that would happen in Jesus' name.
In Jesus'
Amen.
name. Thank you so much for being with us, and I've enjoyed speaking with you, Christina.
Thank you for
And
having
I know
me.
that God's going to use your word to help someone today.
Thanks for watching the Rock Church Network. We hope you can like, follow, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We're going to provide you with more uplifting daily content. We can't wait to connect with you more. Stay connected, stay blessed, and see you in the next video.